Good morning and welcome to our monthly workshop. I'm really excited about this one. Don't ship your pants for anybody that hasn't watched that video. It's super funny. Anyway, on to more serious matters. I am super excited to have a longtime MetalMiner friend and partner, Germán Dominguez from Mexico Sourcing Group, and also I understand MSG Contract Services. And Germán, if you don't mind, if you want to just tell us a little bit about both of those two companies, that would be fantastic. And then we'll get in with a Q&A.
Thank you very much, Lisa. It's great. It's great to connect with you again and do another collaboration. And thank you very much for having me and give me the opportunity to talk about all these, subjects that are on everyone's mind right now. But definitely, when we met, MSG had only one company, which was a supply chain company that was founded in 2003. So we've been doing this for 20 years now. Imagine that.
Wow.
And we have successfully reshored from China alone over $1 billion of purchase value, annual purchase value for all of our clients. Now, that's a lot. Because if you consider that sourcing in Mexico is 100 times more difficult and 100 times more time consuming than sourcing in China. And the reason why I'm saying that is because for every one, let's say, metal fabricator, or for every one metal stamper that you can qualify in Mexico, you find 100 equivalent suppliers in China. So imagine that delta. And that's the reason why we exist, because we primarily based our consulting initiatives on DFM, which is Design for Manufacturability in Mexico for Mexico production. And that means doing a lot of the steel conversions from the Chinese metric sizes to the imperial sizes that are produced in Mexico. So that's the consulting firm that it's been for over 20 years. And now in the last couple of years, we've got into the global logistics because, our clients were asking us for help as a result of the pandemic, right? And they asked us to find alternate logistics strategies. And so we started introducing them to all the ports that are available to bring their raw materials from overseas into Mexico. Most of these clients have what we call maquiladoras in Mexico, and so they are assembly finished goods in Mexico with overseas raw materials and components, right? But they were using, the traditional ports that everyone was using back then, which is, LA, Long Beach, but they didn't know about availability or other options of importing their materials through Mexico. And so what we've been doing is we have been setting up and rerouting the logistics through some of these Mexican ports, such as the Ensenada port, the Manzanillo port. At the end of the day, what this has resulted is in lower costs, faster lead times for them, and lower risk as well, And so that is the contract services, which is the newest company. Now, that company, in addition to providing global logistics and 3PL services and 4PL services, it also provides what we in Mexico call manufacturing shelter services. Manufacturing shelters is something that only Mexico offers.
What is that exactly?
A manufacturing shelter, imagine a shelter. So let's say you want to diversify like China plus one. You want to have an operation in Mexico because it's a good idea to have something of your own in Mexico in operation. But you don't know the legal system in Mexico, which is very complex, right? The accounting system in Mexico is one of the most complex. Actually, Mexico is one of the countries that ranks very high in complexity of doing business in the legal and accounting system.
Okay.
So a shelter, what it does is that we offer all the back office services such as accounting, legal, labor, like when you hire an employee in Mexico, it's a big liability because you now have a responsibility with that employee that the government asks you to really fulfill that responsibility. And so what we've done is that we take the risk out of OEMs and tier ones, and then we provide the labor, the back office, accounting, legal, as I said, but we also provide the logistics for them. So that means that all they have to be concerned with is to bring the raw materials and bring the know-how and bring the machinery equipment. Everything else we take care of. So if they bring the machinery equipment and the processes and the know-how, we bring the labor to the table, and we bring everything that they need to be in operation in as little as 3 months.
Amazing, amazing. And what a transformation from 20 years ago, right?
It is.
It's so you hit on a couple of things that kind of touch on sort of my next question, which is really about walk us through what you're seeing from, I'm going to call it a macro trend perspective regarding nearshoring, but in particular, if you could do sort of like, think of it more as like pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, what has changed, and help us understand that. I know you've touched on some of these things already, but just give you a chance to kind of lay out what are those macro trends you're seeing.
Definitely. I mean, we're seeing a lot more activity going on when it comes to exploring Mexico. Now, you know, before the main companies that Mexico was actually hosting to for foreign direct investment, most of them were North American based, like the US, Canada. But now what we're seeing is that a lot of Chinese companies are coming and investing in Mexico, right? And so we're seeing that number increasing every month. So not only China, but also companies from India as well, from Spain, from Europe, from everywhere, not only North America now, but globally, everyone is interested in exploring how can I leverage Mexico for my global production or manufacturing strategy.
So are
So
you, yeah, the European companies are coming into Mexico in order to sell more effectively into the US? Is that part of that?
everyone, yes, everyone looks at Mexico as a segue to be closer to the biggest consumer market, which is the US, right? Now, before, the pain was not that big and a lot of companies didn't take action, right? But now that the pain is, it's important. After the pandemic, everyone realized, you know, I'm late. I should have been in Mexico 5 years ago. Now, what they're trying to do now is shorten the time frame, right? What they're trying to do now is expedite. And there's so much you can do to do that, but it takes time. I'm talking about you need at least a couple of years to mature any operation in Mexico, from the time you open any plant in Mexico to the time you stabilize the production and the logistics, and you're able to localize or reshore some of your direct material supply base. Is going to take you anywhere from 2 to 3 years minimum. But the problem is that everyone is trying to compress the time to 6 months or less than 1 year, and it's not happening, you know. And this is the reason why we see all this activity, because everyone wants to be up and running in Mexico, you know, before the end of the year, and it's difficult to do it in such a short time.
That's interesting. So that has changed. Are you seeing any trends in terms of the size of companies that you're working with, like where the demand is? Is it all companies are coming there? Who's doing better? Who's worse? I'm curious, just from a manufacturing footprint perspective, what you're seeing.
Yes, it's interesting because we're seeing, companies as small as $5 million revenue, companies that were operating right here in El Paso, Texas, are now migrating some of their operations. Actually, one of our clients is one of these machine shops that they decided that in addition to having machining operation in El Paso, they now needed a machining operation across south of the border, which is Juarez. And so, before these companies were not interested in exploring Mexico because they thought, I'm not a big company. I mean, why should I be in Mexico? But
Right.
they realized that regardless of the size of your revenue, you can't get advantages by having any type of production in Mexico, especially if it's a value-added operation like assembly, painting, finishing, machining, secondary operations like weldments, welding, you name it. Sub-assemblies and final assembly is what we get, where we do our best job when it comes to offering the lowest cost possible for value added and for labor costs. Now, that is the small and medium-sized businesses that before were not really interested in exploring. But then we also have a whole spectrum of companies, and then we're getting really big companies that before were industries that we've never seen here. Like one of the industries that we've always lived with is the automotive industry, right? So the
Right.
automotive industry is like second
How we
nature
met.
for Mexico.
Yeah.
But we really don't have, like, for example, the disposable industries in Mexico. Now, if you talk about the food service industry, right? The
Yeah.
food service is always been an overseas manufacturing industry. Well, now what we're seeing is that overseas food service manufacturer for disposable silverware, that's a good example, for plastic straws, are coming to Mexico to open up operations in Mexico. No, that's a new industry for Mexico
That's
because
interesting.
before we didn't have that. And just like that, we have in the last 6 months, we've identified in the consulting firm about 32 industries that were not existed in Mexico before, and that they have come to Mexico just in the last 6 to 12 months.
So that's all post-pandemic, all of it, the new stuff.
All of it, exactly.
Wow, very, very, very interesting. So I'm going to kind of switch topics a little bit. You talked about some of those trends. You had a really cool post on your LinkedIn. I just want to remind everybody, if you have any questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat room or the chat on the side. If there's anything that we are not able to answer on the fly here, we'll definitely get back in touch with you. So Herman, I noticed on your LinkedIn post, you had a sourcing tips section for people looking at Mexico. And I'm going to put on our procurement hats and ask you to comment using the Pareto principle. Give us the couple few rules or couple few tips that you think make up the bulk of the problems, and let's call it, disasters or mistakes that companies have made when coming to Mexico. So just a couple high-level tips and thoughts that you might have for all of us.
Definitely. I mean, I guess the first tip that I can provide is that if you are a buyer that is right now buying finished good assemblies from, let's say, an overseas supplier or a Chinese supplier, when you come to Mexico, if this is the first time you're trying to source in Mexico, you're probably going to want to source the same type of suppliers, which is final assembly suppliers. But most of the time, 9 out of 10 times or 9 out of 10 initiatives do not find a supplier that is currently doing a final assembly that they like, the one that they're procuring from Asia.
I see.
And so the first thing that you have to do is that you have to realize that you have to work or source based on bill of materials, not on finished good in Mexico. You can get to a finished good supplier, but it's not going to happen if you don't work on the BOM level first. And this is one of the first thing that we help our clients realize. By taking care of the BOM, we're going to be able to achieve a good globally competitive target price, or a target price that you're looking for to justify the business case to start placing POs with Mexican suppliers. But if you start trying to source finished good assembly, you can spend, and we have had clients, many of them, that spent 2-3 years trying to find that supplier that could provide a finished good assembly, and they couldn't find it. And when we changed the approach from finished good to BOM component, and then from that start building and developing the supplier to become a tier 1 supplier for them, then all of a sudden we start seeing progress, meaningful progress, in as little as 6 months, where before they were taking 2 or 3 years and no real results. So that's the most important thing. Realize that Mexico is a component manufacturing country. It's not really a finished good manufacturing country.
Super helpful. Any other tips or things that you see, mistakes or pitfalls you could?
Yes, expectations.
About that.
you have to have realistic expectations. You have to be prepared. Again, going back to my earlier comment, one versus the ratio 1 to 100 ratio, right? Everyone, one supplier in Mexico versus 100 suppliers in China. So if you were able to successfully complete a sourcing initiative in China in 3 months, 6 months, now you need to be prepared for at least to invest 1 year in Mexico. And so a lot of the problems arise from having expectations that are not going to be met by Mexico supply base. And so having those expectations and the way you also communicate internally with senior leadership about the timing and the time that it gets for any Mexico supplier to be up and running or to be on board, quality, cost, delivery wise, is going to be anywhere, about 1 year. And
Right.
so if you manage those expectations internally with your stakeholders, this is the first thing that you are responsible to do as a buyer. You need to manage those expectations with every stakeholder. Otherwise, everyone is going to think that you probably that you probably are not doing enough in Mexico. But there's some things that are not expedited in Mexico, and one of those is the supplier development effort.
Good to know. Herman, I remember I'm thinking of a time when you spoke at one of our conferences, and it was probably the most hysterical business conference speaker topic I read. I think you know where I'm going with this, but I remember you saying, I think you came up in front of the room and you said, I have one piece of advice. Do not source from Mexico. I will tell you all the reasons you should not be sourcing from Mexico. And you had a whole 45-minute presentation. What has changed since then? And how have manufacturers in Mexico kind of come up since that sort of, it was hilarious, that presentation, but kind of where's your head today on where Mexico is compared to back then?
Well, I've always said Mexico sourcing is not compatible with a global sourcing initiative. So we get a lot of OEMs, big OEMs, that they have a new product development, right? And they launched this global sourcing initiative, and they include Mexico as part of the global sourcing initiative. Now you have Mexico competing against not only China, but also Vietnam, India, right? Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore. But what's going to happen is that all of these countries are going to come back with a return quotation probably before Mexico can even, get a grasp of, the specifications. And so what ends up happening is that, I always say this, global sourcing is a path of least resistance. Global sourcing. That's why I'm saying you have to be committed to start sourcing in Mexico. You have to have a why. Why do we want to source in Mexico? Why do we want to develop supply in Mexico? It's not because of cost, only. You have to have deeper reasons to do that, because it's going to be difficult to do that. And if you don't have a strategy, it's also not going to work. So that's why I'm saying, but a lot has changed. The good thing is that Mexico is now in a manufacturing momentum that we have to take advantage at the small and medium-sized businesses. So what we're seeing is that a lot of capex is being invested in the Mexican manufacturing, and we have to make sure that we understand internally our material specifications, so that we can put the right component and assembly with the right capex or machine and equipment at the supplier level. So what you're going to find is that if you came to Mexico 1 year ago, 6 months ago, and you come back again early next year, you're going to find a very different, manufacturing base. Is that dynamic? Every 6 months, we're seeing a new supplier popping up in Mexico, a new capex investment, a new fiber laser machine. Like, for example, one of our suppliers, metal fab suppliers, they just acquired a 25,000 watt fiber laser machine. You know how many 25,000 watts there are in Mexico? There's not that many. But now we're seeing this big capex investment happening in Mexico. all of that is because the nearshoring is giving them the opportunity to do this bigger investment. So we are, we ought to always keep, you know, uh, always be benchmarking our supply base every 6 months in Mexico.
It's so interesting. I find that fascinating. And I'm not surprised, but I'm also glad to hear that it sounds like um, it's very dynamic and it's changing
Very.
rapidly. So that's great. I'm curious, just, you talked about the warehouse, the, manufacturing shelters, et cetera. I'm curious, like some of the issues, the business problems that you saw, that why it made sense to set that up. And, do most of your clients take advantage of that if they are moving operations, or kind of what's the right fit for somebody to look for, like I'm not going to call it a 3PL, but let's call it an outsourced partner for some of the back office stuff, if you will.
I think that in Mexico also the customs system in Mexico is very complex as well. And you have to really have a good knowledge about how to import into Mexico, because it's not as easy as importing into the US. We import from into the US, and we also import into Mexico. Mexico is a more complex country when it comes to customs laws and foreign trade laws. And so 3PL services are almost mandatory in Mexico if you want to have a streamlined supply chain. Uh, One of the things that we have to understand also is the freight system in Mexico is very expensive, right? So mile by mile, shipping by truck in Mexico internally, let's say from the port to the uh, northern border, is going to be more expensive than shipping from the Long Beach or LA port to your warehouse in the US or in El Paso. So once we understand that, and that is going to take a longer lead time once it hits the Mexico port, um, there are strategies that the 3PL services can help you with expediting, right? So one of those is asking your overseas suppliers to have a VMI in Mexico. That's one of the things that you ought to start asking from your Chinese suppliers is you need to have a VMI with a 3PL in Mexico so that I can have almost just-in-time deliveries, right? Now, the lead times when it comes to transit times, right? Now, Mexico is not a big country when it comes to geographic territory. However, when it comes to shipping products, you can expect anywhere from probably 3 to 5 years. I'm sorry, 3 to 5 days to cover any shipping transit time from, let's say, Mexico City
Okay.
all the way to the border in Laredo or Eagle Pass or Juarez, right? So that's a good. It's not that bad, but you have to realize that if you want to have a door-to-door logistics delivery, meaning from Mexico City to Chicago, you have to partnership with a logistic company that is going to be able to offer you that door-to-door services, because not all logistics company can do that, right? Most of them, what they have to do is they have to do transport at the border. Now, what you want to do in order to save time and money is that you want to have the same truck, the same dry van, be able to ship the same product from Mexico all the way to Chicago without
Right.
shipping trucks or
That's
dry
right.
van.
Yeah.
You know,
I remember from my metal trading days that being an issue, and there was always some transfer of something somewhere.
exactly at the
Um,
border, especially the border.
yeah, it slows you down. Can you comment, just now that we're talking about trade and tariffs? So obviously, here in the States, we've put in place a number of tariffs on a lot of primary metals, materials, mostly steel and aluminum. Walk us through. I know there's been a lot of news that Mexico too is now starting to implement, tariffs and duties and all sorts of things like that. Walk us through kind of what trends you're seeing there. I'm curious also the split between primary and more manufactured goods, and if there's differences, and then kind of what's driving it is the big question as well.
The reason behind these new tariffs that the Mexican government has imposed there are anywhere from 5 to 25%, very similar to the U.S. are because what they want to do is that they want to they want to foster the domestic manufacturing industry, right? Um, but but they didn't give us time to prepare for that. That's the problem. And so if we consider that, Mexico relies, when it comes to raw materials and components, heavily relies on overseas suppliers, it creates a bottleneck. Now, I don't think Mexico is going to be able to step in and replace those imports, component wise or raw material wise,
Right.
in the short term. And even though we're creating more capacity, like, for example, either Ternium, Grupo Acerero, Tiasa, all the steel mills are introducing new product lines. There's big capex investment happening at the steel mill industry in Mexico from all of these steel mills, but it's going to take time, right? A
Yes.
good example is Nucor JFE joint venture. So they started doing hot dip galvanized coils
Yep.
in Mexico, but it's taking them a couple of years to become qualified for the automotive industry. So it takes time to replace overseas importations. It's creating a bottleneck. So what you should do is exactly do that. If you're doing that sourcing in Mexico, and if you're focusing on the BOM component that I explained before, you're gonna cover both of those. You're gonna be able to not only qualify a tier one or finished goods supplier, but in the process, the advantages of doing that is that you're also going to qualify component suppliers that are definitely going to be useful for your supply chain in the near future.
Good to know. Good to know. Okay, it wouldn't be complete if we didn't spend a few minutes just talking about the automotive sector. I think that's how we originally met. I know we've done some work together, but so obviously we have this UAW strike that is now, it seems like in this last week, I think by Friday, we will have finished week 6 of the strike. One of the things that we've been talking about is you'll start feeling the industry pain a lot more after 6
We
weeks.
are.
So we're kind of right here. Walk us through how that's working for these automotive supply chain. That's, a lot of it is coming from Mexico to the US and back and forth. Just thoughts on the strike, its impact, and how it impacts labor in Mexico as well. I'd be curious.
Definitely. Mexico has a lot of tier ones. There's obviously a plethora of tier one industries, right? Like Lear Corporation and Aptiv and Borg Warner. And what we're seeing here in Mexico is that we're having shutdowns, and so we're not having a full week work because there's not enough assemblies going on right now. And you know the other thing of this is that the most important thing is what's happening with the new developments in the electrification industry for electric vehicles. Now, in Mexico, electrification is a big deal when it comes to new investments. So what you're seeing in the automotive industry is that the big investments are happening when it comes to electrification, uh, uh, you know, applications like for electric vehicles. But those industries right now, given the strike in the U.S., those plans are now being rescheduled. They're being pushed out for 6 months or more, and that's going to hurt Mexico when it comes to, you know, having more production when it comes to electrical vehicles in the future.
We're seeing that as well.
Yes,
So some of those things are also getting kicked out. Interesting.
yes.
We could go on and on, Herman. I mean, it's been a while since we've caught up, and I probably could think of a million other things to discuss, but we're kind of coming up on our 30 minutes. I just wanted to let everyone, we've put some things in the chat just so that people could follow on in terms of some of the free resources available on MetalMiner. And also, if anybody is interested in connecting with Herman, he's also on LinkedIn and posts regularly, and I'm happy to make any kind of introduction. So just ping me at any time. And with that, I want to thank everybody for joining, and have a great day. Thanks a lot.